This article that is being examined today is called Collaboration, Collegiality, and Collective Reflection, a case study of professional development for teachers. It's written by Jennifer Kelly and Saber Cherkowski. The video presentation is by Kenneth Martin. This article is a case study that documents a professional development initiative called Changing Results for Young Readers, otherwise known as CR4YR. It was conducted in British Columbia. This case study was performed in a rural school district, and it analyzes teachers' experiences in order to see the significance of teacher collaboration and relationships among teachers. I also analyze how professional development can be structured and facilitated. What is documented within this article and case study? It documents the progress of developing a PLC with literacy intervention teachers, classroom teachers, and other specialists in order to support early readers in the classroom. It documents the teacher's perspective of the PLC to reveal the actual experiences in the PLC. It documents if the PLC conversations transferred to the classroom. And lastly, it documents if all this work had an influence on creating inclusive classrooms to instruct all young readers in the classroom setting. Now, the components of the PLC that are emphasized as a result of the case study came down to three aspects. The first is collaboration. The second is relationships. And the third is reflective practice. When one thinks about collaboration, you think about communication, people talking. And that's exactly what this is. But it's meaningful talk. It's talk amongst teachers with the same goal. And the more opportunities there is for collaboration among these teachers, the more in depth the PLC is going to get. And it will continue to develop and become stronger. And if there's consistent work by these teachers, it can eventually lead to a fresh new perspective to teaching and learning. And this is an effect that can be felt by every teacher in the PLC. This collaboration, meaningful dialogue, brings on reflection, which is when a person looks at themselves, looks at how they do things. Also brings about questions that they ask themselves. And this reflection and questions and analyzing how you do things is only going to build the strength of your teaching. It also leads to ownership of your craft. And once you take that ownership will strengthen the group as a whole. Collegiality. Collegiality involves quite a bit of trust. And that's what a PLC is all about, that trustful communication. And when you have that collegiality and that trust and that open communication, teachers are more willing to take risks. They're more willing to step outside of their comfort zones, more willing to listen to another peer, because that open line of communication and that trust is there. And you're also more willing to gain acceptance from your peers. And when you're gaining their acceptance, they're gaining your acceptance. it results in overall stronger buy-in. Trust and respect can lead to a shared sense of meaning and also may help develop an identity within the PLC. Now, reflective practice. And this was mentioned a little bit earlier with self-reflection, with looking at your own craft. But the way you get these questions, where these come from, is through the interactions with other teachers. And ways this happens could be through peer observations. That's going to classrooms and watching your fellow teachers teach. Meaningful conversations within your PLC. That is a sure way to lead to reflective practice. And also seeing different perspectives. Because everybody doesn't do things the same way. And that's why the PLC is so important. Because you see how other people do things. Now, once you start this reflection, it gives teachers an opportunity to share their reflective experiences in order to strengthen each other's expertise. So imagine a group of 10 professionals all reflecting on themselves and then sharing those reflections and those experiences with each other. And that everybody just builds on it. And focused conversations. Focused is a key word there, not just meaningless dialogue, but focused conversations about reflective practice can lead to a shift in a teacher's mindset. And that is one of the foundations for PLCs. Shifting teachers' mindsets. Now, the PLC meetings that were conducted in this case study, there was 7 of them, 7 PLC meetings conducted over an entire school year. And these PLC meetings lasted all day long. It was a complete full day. There was facilitator, there was early reading advocates, there was literacy intervention teachers, and there was classroom teachers, all in this PLC. The provincial facilitator would facilitate for 4 out of the 7 sessions. When that person wasn't there to facilitate, the early reading advocates would facilitate in their absence. Now, the classroom teachers and the literacy intervention teachers, they would share their experiential information. And they would take one student, one case student from their class and give their information to the group from the logs they have been taking throughout the year. Now, the methods for this study. It was a case study method, and it was a case study method so they could get a better picture of the experiences of the teachers within the PLCs. These are experiences. It's qualitative. It's in depth. Time consuming. It's very difficult. Now, these participants would meet for 7 full day sessions throughout the year, like I said earlier. And the participants would keep a reflective journal at each of the PLC meetings. And these participants would also have an in-depth interview at the end of the school year. Now, when you're looking at the participants, then here's who all was involved in this study. Within the PLCs, you had 14 classroom teachers. You had 6 literacy intervention teachers. You had 2 early reading advocates, and you had 1 provincial literacy facilitator. Now, out of these 14 classroom teachers, 4 of them volunteered to keep journals and participate in the reflective interview. 4 out of 14. I emphasize volunteered, wasn't randomly selected. And also, out of the 6 literacy intervention teachers, 4 of them volunteered to keep journals and also participate in the reflective interview. Now, another participant was one of the authors of this paper. She was not only an author, she was a participant and researcher. And that's interesting. Now for data collection, since it's a qualitative experiment, it's very difficult. The reflective journals at each session, there was reflective journals at each session and the open-ended interview. Now, the interviews were 30 to 40 minutes, and they were recorded word for word. So that's 8 total people, 4 classroom teachers, 4 literacy intervention teachers. At 30 to 40 minutes apiece, they recorded word for word, transcribed, and then these interviews were analyzed by coding, categorizing, and abstracting data, all qualitative research, time-consuming. And they're looking through all these studies and investigating. They're looking for themes and patterns that are emerging. And from this data, the categories that were exposed were collaboration, collegial relationships, and shifting mindsets about the work of teaching and learning. Now, when you think about gaps in research, there were some things that jumped out to me. Number one, the author of this paper is also a participant in the study. There's no way that a bias can't be involved there. She worked at the school. She knows these kids. She wants them to be successful. It's very hard to not have a little bit of bias when it's about people that you care for. Another tough part of this research is very time consuming. You know, the entire process takes a whole school year. And then you have these 7 full day professional days thrown in there. Okay, and with all the meetings, you've got these journal entries, 40-minute interviews for 8 different people. You got to analyze all that information, do your coding, try to find the themes, trends. Very tough process. And those professional days for 7 days for 14 classroom teachers and 6 literacy intervention teachers, those had to be paid for. And then you had to pay for, probably had to pay for the provincial facilitator. All these things add up. But even with the gaps in the research, all in all, this article did come out with some good findings. Through this year of all these meetings and all the PLCs that were performed, they came out with 3 very important aspects of PLCs. And if these 3 aspects can be utilized, it can have a great effect on young readers.